Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining today's web conference, EIM Resource Sufficiency Evaluation Enhancements. Please note that all participant lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how to ask a verbal question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require technical assistance, send a note to the event producer or call our help desk at 888-796-6118. With that, I'll turn the call over to Heidi Holmberg-Carter, Senior Client Trainer. Heidi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for everyone who's joining us today. Really appreciate you here with us this Monday morning. Like Michelle said, I'm Heidi Holmberg-Quinley of the Customer Readiness Group. I have a few other subject matter experts that are here in the room with me, so I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves right now.
Virginia Thompson from the Customer Experience Team.
Gina Wanzer, also from the Customer Experience Team.
Steve Castanelli, Customer Services. Mike Schultz, Business Analyst.
All right. Thank you all for being here. And again, thanks for being on the call. Today's training will provide Energy Imbalance Market, or EIM, participants with a general understanding of how both the bid range capacity, or BRC, and the Flexible Ramping Sufficiency Test, the FRST, will now independently evaluate and determine the EIM transfer limits at the 15-minute interval level, as well as a preview of some added data transparency that we're going to have in existing reports in Open Access Same-Time Information System, OASIS, as well as Customer Market Results Interface, CMRI. For more information on this, there is BRS, which is the Business Requirement Specification, on our website. And so right now we're going to kind of basically just take you through that high level, break down the BRS for you, because this is just simply to get you prepared for the unstructured market simulation that's going to be coming up starting on April 1st. So we'll talk about what those dates are. Again, this is just to get you ready to start practicing with that. We will be doing more research and creating a computer-based training that will go along with this that will be published mid-April. So with that, and also this presentation, along with the slides that we're going to cover today, are going to be posted on our Learning Center, and the slides will be posted this afternoon. The presentation, the recorded presentation, will be posted in approximately 3 business days. So today's topics that we're going to cover: for business practice, there's a change. There's an allowance of a tolerance threshold of 1% for the flexible ramp sufficiency test. So we're not going to really talk about this very much because that was already implemented. That was implemented as of February 15th of this year. But we will talk about the independent bid range capacity and flexible ramping sufficiency evaluations that are now going to be at that 15-minute interval basis. We're also going to talk about the determination of EIM transfer limits that are based on the 15-minute FRST results. As far as application changes, we will talk about the BAAOP tool, which is the Balancing Authority Area Operations Portal. So there are some modifications that are going to be going into effect officially in April and on April 16th. And that's for resource sufficiency test status and bid range capacity test detailed results. But we do have an update on when that will be changed as far as your display. So as of today, your display will change, but the actual functionality of that, as far as changing the business practices, that will not take place until April 16th. And we'll also talk about transparency improvements provided for existing applications that are reported in OASIS and CMRI. For a real quick update about the changes, there was there was an email that went out. So I'm going to let Virginia talk about that really quickly.
So on this past Friday, we sent out 3 separate communications. There was a notice that came from our Bronto tool that would have read customer service notice at the top that gave additional information and was sent to all users of the BAAOP tool. I also sent an attachment in a specified email on Friday to anyone who had joined us for our last joint quarterly meeting. Since this was a topic that was discussed briefly there, please, if you attended the joint quarterly meeting, please check for an email from me with an attachment. And finally, the third email that went out was to anyone who is on my EIM entity weekly report that I send out that gives you notifications about what's coming in the prompt week and what to pay attention to. There was an attachment to that as well, and I asked that that be forwarded to anyone who is looking at the results of the resource sufficiency test, because it will be information about the pass-fail of that test and this particular screen in the UI that you can see that information on. And we'll go through it in a little bit more detail in a few slides. So anyway, if you haven't seen an email from me, please filter for Virginia Thompson and forward that information on to your operators or anyone who's interested in the results of your resource test.
Thank you, Virginia. All right, so now let's break this down. Let's look at the system changes. So from the real-time market, the RTPD, RTD timeline, the change that is happening is that now the EIM transfer limits will be based on 15-minute sufficiency test results. Now it will be for EIM transfers for 15-minute intervals that are failing the flex ramp up, the FRU, and the flex ramp down, FRD, that are limited from below and above, which are the imports and exports, to the least restrictive of one of the two that are listed there on the screen, either the EIM transfer in the previous 15-minute interval from the last successful 15-minute market, or FMM, or the base EIM transfer schedule in current 15-minute interval from the current FMM. So basically this the bid range capacity test independently will be evaluating each 15-minute interval of each trade hour instead of on the hourly basis as it is today. We will have flexible ramping sufficiency tests that are independently evaluating 15-minute intervals of the trade hour, constraining transfer limits for each 15-minute interval that fails instead of the entire trade hour. And there's a new rule that automatically fails the flex ramping sufficiency test status if the same 15-minute intervals capacity test fails. And we'll show you here in a few minutes what the BAAOP changes are going to look like, but there will be display changes to BAAOP for the bid range capacity test results. That will take them to a 15-minute granularity. Same for the flexible ramping sufficiency test results. And then again, there will be an EIM transfer limits, and that will be for each BAA, balancing authority area in the EIM area. RTPD and RTD will enforce this logic that constrains the transfer limits for the BAAs with this failed ramping sufficiency test, again at that 15-minute interval. So here we have a sample slide. We're going to be talking about the timelines when these potentially will fail. So this is kind of and when they'll be checked, all these different tests. So right now, again, they're being tested on an hourly basis, but there are tests that are being run for every 15 minutes. So if we look at an example right here of a basic hour timeline leading up to an operating hour for the EIM, you've got EIM participants and then the market operator, basically what the ISO is doing. So if we're looking at an example of hour ending 4, we're looking at the top of the hour, which is 3. So if we start applying some timelines to that, base schedules and energy bids, those are all due to be submitted by T-75 minutes before before the actual trade hour. By 2 o'clock, after those tests have been submitted, results of the sufficiency test will be published. And then at 2:05 or T-minus 55, updated base schedules are submitted if necessary. So if any of those fail, this would be an opportunity to make any adjustments for testing to happen again. Then at T-minus 45, results of the sufficiency tests are published once again. And any corrections made by T-minus 40. These updated base schedules are submitted if necessary. And that could be by the entity SC. And then here at 225 or 222.5 at T-minus 37.5, you've got the start of the 15-minute market. So all of these timelines that are leading up to that, that's where the sufficiency tests are taking place before the awards are published, E-tags are deadlines, and then we run the different intervals for the hour. But like we said, right now, those 4 intervals, if you failed it in the the sufficiency test prior, you would have failed for the entire hour, but now we're just breaking it down by each one of those 15-minute intervals. So here we have an example of that 15-minute EIM transfer limit logic for a balancing authority area that failed the flexible ramping sufficiency test. I'll let you take a look at that for a moment. So this is an example of how EIM transfer limit logic will curtail limits for 15-minute intervals and associated 5-minute intervals with failed flex ramp up and flex ramp down sufficiency. So that table shows the EIM net transfer limit from when the failing, from below when the failing, when you're failing the FRU sufficiency test. Sorry about that. Michael, is there anything you wanted to add on this particular slide that would add further clarification, or is this is just showing the different timelines, the different intervals like we saw on the last slide?
Right. What you'll see is that your transfer limit can change over each interval on the basis of the prior, the prior binding limits. So that logic will every 15-minute run for each of the intervals. If there's any questions.
Okay. Yeah, and the following rules will apply to the 15-minute interval EIM sufficiency test evaluations. The same EIM transfer limit applied to the failed 15-minute interval shall also apply to its 3 corresponding 5-minute market intervals. The last previous 15-minute interval shall be the last 15-minute interval of the current hour if the 15-minute interval that fails the flex ramp up or down test is in the first 15-minute interval of the next hour. Likewise, the same is true if the 15-minute interval that fails the flex ramp up or flex ramp down test is the second, third, or fourth 15-minute interval in the second hour of the half-time horizon for which there is no previous solution for the immediately prior 15-minute interval. If a 15-minute market FMM run other than half, which is our hour-ahead scheduling process, fails, the EIM transfer schedules from the last FMM run that has succeeded shall be used to derive the EIM transfer limits for the 15-minute intervals that fail the FRU or FRD test. If half or all prior FMM runs fail, the base EIM transfer shall be used. And all this information can be found in the BRS, our business requirement specifications. So balancing test results. Earlier, Virginia was talking about some of the screens, the UI, the user interface that are changing. This is one of those examples. This is the 15-minute base schedule test changes that are going to be showing up in the UI. So these are the changes that are actually going to be there as of today. But again, the business process, business practice won't be in effect until April 16th. So starting today through April 16th, the Flex Ramp Sufficiency Test results, as well as the bid range capacity test results, will now be displayed in 15-minute intervals instead of hourly on the BSCH execution control screen. So, although again, it will look different, if any of the 15-minute intervals indicate a failure, the entire hour will be treated as a failure, as the sufficiency tests prior to April 16th will still be the hourly results.
So I'll just point out with the view that you're seeing here is what's going to change today. And again, as Heidi said, this is just the visual of the UI in production. You'll see this in test as well. But until the functionality is in place on April 16th, it'll look like this. So today, the view has each of these tests sort of laid out horizontally. And starting this afternoon, once the UI changes, you'll see the tables sort of stacked as you see them here in the visual today. So it'll still be all the information, but they're stacked now because some of the tests are hourly and some of the tests will be in 15 minutes. And as Heidi mentioned, starting this afternoon, when you see this UI change and until April 16th when the functionality goes into effect, if you see fail for any of the 15-minute intervals, as is today, you failed the full hour instead of just the interval where it says fail.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a quick pause right here and see if anyone has any questions about anything that we've covered so far.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we move to Q&A, please feel free to place yourself in the question queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And we do have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
One moment, I'm sorry. One moment. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Tom Wu from WAPA. Can you go back to page 8 and walk through a few lines of that table?
Okay, if we're looking here at, remember we saw on the slide earlier, we saw the T-minus 75, the T-minus 55, the T-minus 40. It's all those different time frames. If we start here at the T-minus 75, so let's say at the FMM at T-minus 82.5, we have the in EIM transfer megawatts of negative 200. Then at T-minus 75, we've got the real-time base schedule and the FMM value. So you've got the base transfer of negative 300 for each one of the 15-minute intervals. You have the flex ramp-up test. So if you look at interval 1, they passed at the T-minus 75. And at T-minus and then for interval 2, the T plus 22.5, they also passed for that flex ramp up. But then, based on that base schedule and the values, they show an initial fail for the flex ramp up test. And then at T minus 67.5, you also see that there was a fail on the transfer limits of the 300. You've got the EIM transfer, and you've got those values right there. So then at the interval of T minus 55, you've got your base transfer, negative 100 for all 4 intervals. But now the flex ramp up test failed, but the second passed, but you've still got 2 fails here for the flex ramp up. And then the transfer limit megawatts -200, -320. So you'd be failing the transfer limits based on the flex ramp up test. Is there something you want to add, Michael?
Just that you're in each interval referencing the prior EIM, the prior intervals EIM transfer. For example, if you're looking at the interval 1, T plus 7.5 minutes, you will be looking at the T minus the hour before, T minus 7.5 EIM transfer. So you're comparing that with the actual base transfer and taking the least restrictive only when you're in fail. So that's when the constraint or the limits will apply. And so you're taking the least restrictive for that, and that's what you see. So like if we go to the T minus 55 RTBS run, it's looking at the -100 and the -200 import limits or the transfers, and it's taking the least restrictive, which is the -200, and that's what it's applying. So it's always trying to look at what's prior binding and taking that. And so as we're going through each of the successive T minus 55, T minus 40, you know, T minus 75, but you're always referencing that prior out for the first interval. You're always referencing the prior hours binding for the fourth interval, the T minus 7.5, and so as you see, as you go down the first interval column, the T plus minus 75, that number is changing only because the reference to the base transfer is changing, but you're still referencing the prior hours transfer limit. So if we go down, we see from the T minus 55, you're comparing the -200 with the -100. Least restrictive is the -100 or 200, so that's what's applied. But as we get closer to the trade hour at T minus 40, the least restrictive is the base transfer, and that's the -250, and so that's what gets applied as the limit. So that's where the logic really lies, is just, you know, referring to the prior intervals, EIM transfer, and the current intervals base transfer schedule, and taking the least restrictive and applying that as the limit for those intervals which fail. This is the resource sufficiency test. Did that answer your question, Tom?
Thanks, Mike. That answers my question.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, we're moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Paul Ware, PSCH Energy. Asking about BSAP, we see the changes in BAAOP for this. So there are going to be similar changes to the displays, and when are those going to be implemented, if so? Thanks.
So the displays, we'll walk through what the displays look like, and you're going to see the changes of what they're going to look like today, but in the actual UI, but they're just not going to be applied, as Michael just explained it yet, officially, but the UI will change, and we'll walk through what those slides look like.
No, I understand, but those will be in BSAP as well as BAAOP, correct?
Oh, BSAP. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I don't know that we have a slide on BSAP. It should be in test. Paul, we'll get back to, we can respond to the group here on what the BSAP changes will be. It's my understanding that there aren't any changes.
I haven't seen anything on that, so.
To BSAP. I'll verify that, but I'm fairly confident.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, so you shouldn't see any in those. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, we're moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Brian Holmes. I think most of my question was answered in response to Tong's question, but I'm looking, Mike, at the T-40 RTBS, and there's a null in the fourth interval of the base transfer, and we're calculating a limit of minus 250. I was wondering what is intended there.
Yeah, I see to be honest, it sounds like the null would just be the minus 250. I think it was just an edit error on my part.
Okay, and then so if I had a minus 250 in my base transfer on that T-40 row, that would be less restrictive than the minus 180 I would have inherited from the third interval run optimal transfer.
Right.
And that's why you picked
Correct.
it. Okay.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for catching that. Yeah.
And we're moving to the next question in the queue. Okay. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Fasamala from APS. And I'm sure this is covered, and I just don't quite get it yet. Hello there. When you're determining the EIM transfer limit based on base schedules or the previous 15-minute intervals transfer amount, does that stop updating once you hit T-40? When does that stop updating, I guess is my question. Does it continue to update and look as you're in the instance like what it was the previous 15 minutes, or does it stop at whenever that failure occurred? Does that question make sense?
It's a really good question. So, thank you for bringing that up. We would each, at T-minus 75, T-minus 55, and T-minus 45, reevaluate, see if this failure still exists. And so each run is going to reevaluate. And I think, the other question is, are those values going to change? And they have, absolutely. So we go all the way up to T-minus 40. That's our last check. And we're just evaluating to see what the transfer limit is for the prior interval. That's not going to change. But what is the base transfer? If that base transfer is changed and modified, the logic will apply the less restrictive. And so that can change. So it's kind of why we see how things change over time at the T-minus 75, T-minus 55, and the T-minus 40. So we go all the way up to T-minus 40. Did that answer your question? Did you want to go a little bit more into examples to kind of grasp it, or how?
Were you asking if we're going to see changes after the T-minus 40?
Yeah, so my real question is, one of the issues we currently experience with FlexRamp is that the solution that we're getting frozen to at the test failure might be completely different than what ends up occurring in real time, and so that'll cause an ETSR swing from where we ended up actually operating to, and then what our limit was for that hour. And so I'm just wondering, I'm trying to figure out if we're going to get those swings now just in 15-minute intervals versus hour because of this, and it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yes. My understanding is that we lock for the last two runs to kind of mitigate, trying to quit moving the goalpost at the T-minus 55 and T-minus 40. We'll lock the load forecast, right? But as you get to the real time, there might be some swing. And I think we'll go a little bit more into the reporting and the greater transparency. And one of the things it'd be good to know is if you are sufficient and everything looks good, how much is your margin? We want to make sure that's reported. And so I think that's one of the enhancements in CMRI that we're providing. So to give you a little more confidence, so if you're at 0.1 sufficiency, you may have a little more risk than if you have 50 megawatts, or something where you have a greater margin. So that might be something that comes into play that could benefit you as we go forward and kind of talk a little bit about the CMRI, and we'll go into that. But you're right, that will experience the granularity at 15-minute intervals the same, and there's the potential of it, going up constraints and down constraints in the same hour now, right? Because we're granular at 15. So I think you raised a really good point, Elizabeth, and I think that's if there's follow-up questions, I'd love to kind of go into it more. But I just want to acknowledge that will happen.
All right, does that help, Elizabeth? Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, we're moving to the next question in the queue.
Okay.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Yeah, this is Mo Sakija with APS as well. I do have a question. I don't know if I'm interpreting this wrong, but if you're failing the third interval at T40 and you are importing minus 270, so why is it allowing you to import more for the next at the T minus 22? I mean, that's against the failure. So you would think it will even freeze you there or not allow you to import more. Am I reading it wrong here or what?
So looking at the hour, the transfer limits, your base transfer is changing after T minus 40, and I think the logic still applies up to the that logic you'll see. So let me take a look. Let's take a look at T minus 22.5. We have the prior EIM transfer at negative 350. That's at T minus 37.5. And that's really kind of and then our transfer limit is, or our transfer schedule was set to minus 250. So it is continually using the logic for the limit up to the point where the binding interval is passed. So that's why you're seeing those other prior intervals start to drop off.
Why are the imports increasing though? That's the opposite of the failure. So it shouldn't allow you to import more, because you failed the flex up.
Okay. I do see your point. Let me talk to, I'd like to kind of get some discussion on that and get back to you.
Okay.
I do see your point. So thank you for raising that.
Yep.
Thanks, Mo. We're going to go ahead and move forward a little bit, and there might be some more questions, but let's go ahead and take a look at some of these reports that Michael was talking about, and then we can follow up with more questions on this if we need. So we'll move forward just a little bit more. So here we've got balancing test results. So again, we already talked about that, the BAAOP enhancements. But there are also enhancements in CMRI, the Customer Market Results Interface. So here you would see the balancing test results. This is what that screen's going to look like, where you have your trade dates, what market, the input time, and the hour ending, and then your test results. So they're going to show up here and for which hour ending it is. And it's going to show you the direction. If it's over or under, you're going to be able to find that on the screen as well as the percentage of imbalance and imbalance amount. So is there anything you wanted to add on that one? Michael?
Well, maybe we'll just address if there's questions.
Okay, yes.
Pretty
straightforward. I mean, it's pretty basic. It's what you're going to see. Are there any questions about the CMRI screen?
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, to enter the question queue, press #2 on your telephone keypad. Or you may submit a written question by submitting it in the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And there are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay, all right, then we'll keep moving along. So now let's look at the flexible ramp sufficiency test. So here's a few different examples of the sufficiency test results, a few scenarios that would cause the sufficiency test to fail. So if a balancing authority area's EIM flexible ramping sufficiency test results results fail for at least one 15-minute interval for a given direction in the same hour where the following conditions occur. So this is kind of the setup slide here. So you kind of see a larger visual of at each 15-minute interval and what the values are, the flexible ramp up, uncertainty requirements, flexible ramping upward capacity. So if you see these values for each one of these requirements, the flexible ramping down and flexible ramping downward capacity. If we see these values that are over here, move to the next screen. Here's an example, and that little box up there is just what we saw on the last screen, so you still have those values. Then here on you would see your test status upward, whether it pass or fail, the test indicator, the ramp up, the ramp type would be showing up in here. These are your percentages and your insufficiency amounts and your requirement amounts.
If I may, Heidi?
Yes.
We see the negative insufficiency amounts are sufficiency, right? So negative insufficiency means how much you're over your requirement. That gives you what we kind of talked about before. That gives you an idea of how much you have for the capacity. So that's kind of why you see the negative showing up.
Yeah, and results will be presented in both directions, the up and down for the trade hour, and that's regardless of whether the test passed or failed. And just like Mike was just saying, values are algebraically presented with negative values as sufficient results. So in the upward ramping direction, if you look at this example, the first interval at 15 has insufficiency within the 1% 1 megawatt tolerance bandwidth. Therefore, it passes the FRST. But in interval 60, the fourth interval, the upward insufficiency exceeds the tolerance threshold. Therefore, the FRST fails. So that's why you're seeing a fail on the fourth interval, the 60-minute interval. For downward flexible ramping, the first and the second intervals, 15 and 30, those fail the downward FRST, and that reduces the BAA's export EIM transfer limit for that time frame. Anything else to add, or is that okay? So that's example 1. In this scenario here, again, kind of setting it up the same way, the BAA's EIM flexible ramping sufficiency test result fails for at least one 15-minute interval for a given occurrence. So for a given direction in same trade hour where the following conditions occur. So again, here's our amount. We look at the breakdown of this example. The results again will be presented in both directions, up and down for the trade hour. and that's regardless of whether it's passed or failed. So here you again see in the upward ramping direction, the first 15 has I've got the right note. So you've got pass in the first 15, pass in the first and the 30, and then you've got the fail in the 60. And that's again because the upward insufficiency exceeds the tolerance threshold and the FRST fails. But for this one, the downward flexible ramping, the first and the second intervals, 15 and 30, fail the downward FRST. Again, that reduces the BAA's export EIM transfer limit.
If I may go back, I think for the interval 60, what we experienced was a capacity test failure for that interval. So although you had the capacity, what drove it, even though the flexible ramping upward capacity was 150, or what we said was, we never got to do that flex ramp for that interval because the capacity test failed. So I think that was the predecessor for that.
Okay.
That we experienced the capacity test failure for that fourth interval rather than for the entire hour, and that's what caused the failure.
So in the BAAOP tool, the UI, this would show up as an enhancement on that flex ramp sufficiency screen. And here, again, you would see the 15-minute flex ramp sufficiency test results. These changes will be visual as of today, but the same business practices as far as failing the whole hour will still be in effect until April 16th. So do we have any questions about what we just covered about the flex ramp requirement sufficiency test?
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. And as a reminder, to submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And we do have a question on the line. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hey, this is Ramon Mitchell from Pacific Corp. Could you go back to page 14, Scenario 1, whichever page was Scenario 1? So I think you have a mix-up there with your flexible, the previous page, please. I think you have a mix-up there with your flexible ramp-up uncertainty requirement, in that the flexible ramping upward capacity is measured against the flexible ramping sufficiency test requirement. The flexible ramping up uncertainty requirement is a component of the flexible ramping sufficiency test requirement. So the flexible ramping upward capacity is not measured against the uncertainty requirement. It's measured against a different value of which the uncertainty requirement is a component of. So I don't think you have your components lined up apples to apples.
Good point. I believe you're correct. We'll make that change.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. Thank you. And
I think we would just, for clarification, we would just say that this is in fact a sufficiency requirement. So I apologize for the confusion, but just for for understanding on this training example, please do consider this as a sufficiency requirement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. And we will I'll follow up with Mike on that, and we'll make sure that we have that a little more clear in the CBT that we're going to put out in mid-April. So thank you for that. Anything else?
There currently are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay. All right, so now let's get into our bid range capacity test. So here we have a couple of scenarios as well. So at T-75, T-55, and T-40, minutes prior to the trade of the next trade hour, the system shall independently evaluate all 15-minute intervals within the trade hour for sufficient bid range capacity in both over and under capacity requirements. So the following rules shall apply to this 15-minute interval EIM capacity test evaluation. Demand forecast will be 15-minute intervals. ISO BAA schedules will be hourly. So T-minus 75 will use the residual unit commitment, the RUC schedule. T-minus 55 and T-minus 40 will use the the hour ahead schedule. Base schedule logic regarding cross-hour ramping should remain as existing today. Bid capacity shall always be assessed in both directions, both over and under, regardless of how the BAA is assessed during the balancing test and irrespective of auto-matching functionality. Capacity test results shall display for the operator at a 15-minute interval granularity. So if we look at that example, again, we have that up here in the corner now, and we look at our capacity test results, scenario 1. So in this, the CMRI is going to now provide reports that will provide this bid range capacity test. And again, that's going to result for both the over and under trade directions for each hour. So in each direction, the most insufficient 15-minute interval results, and that's what's presented in the blue text here on the screen, that will be displayed and that will be broadcasted. So for example, the 15-minute interval for the over direction and for 45 for the under direction. Only the interval's trade hour will be identified in the report. So since one of the 15-minute intervals failed the overcapacity test, the BAA's flexible ramping sufficiency test fails for the same 15-minute interval in the upward direction, and that's reducing the BAA's import EIM transfer limits. So then if we look at scenario 2, so BAA's EIM capacity test result fails for at least one 15-minute interval for each direction in the same trade hour where the following conditions occur. Then the CMRI shall report for this example the most insufficient 15-minute interval results. And again, that's in the blue text. This time for interval 30, resulting in the over direction, and interval 60 results for the under direction. Only the interval's trade hour will be identified in the report. Since the 15-minute intervals failed the BAA's capacity test, intervals 15 and 30 in over direction and interval 60 in the under direction, the BAA's flexible ramping sufficiency test, the FRST, fails for the same 15-minute intervals in the associated direction. Intervals 15 and 30 will fail in the upward direction, reducing the EIM transfer limit, the import EIM transfer limit, and interval 60 in the downward direction, reducing the export EIM transfer limit. One more example for this, example 3, the BAA's EIM capacity test result passes for all 15-minute intervals for each direction in the same trade hour where the following conditions occur. And if we look at the breakdown in this scenario, CMRI shall report the most insufficient 15-minute interval results in the blue text using interval 30 results for the over direction, interval 60 results for the under direction. Only the interval's trade hour will be identified in this report. But since none of the 15-minute intervals failed the BAA's capacity test, no EIM transfer limits will be reduced for any of the intervals within the trade hour in either the import or the export direction. So where you'll see this in the BAAOP screens, and you'll see that in the bid range capacity test. And here you have a couple of the screenshots that you would actually be seeing that in. And so other UI enhancements for this 50-minute granularity that are going to be visible as of today include this bid range capacity test. This UI has been enhanced to include additional fields such as base NSI and demand forecast. Resource-based schedules, bid limits, and scheduled AS are also now included. From the CMRI standpoint, you're going to see the test results here on the bid range capacity test results screen, where you see the trade date, the market, the input time, so you can see the different intervals under the input time type. And the hour ending, you'll see the results here. They're all passing, and it will show you the insufficiency direction of the over and under, as well as the percentages and amounts of the insufficiencies. So at this time, do we have any questions about the bid range capacity test, the changes or the screens?
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, pressing pound 2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. And it looks like we do have a question on the line.
Okay, go ahead.
Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hello, this is Mariano at Bonneville Power. I have one clarifying question on slides 23 or 22. So my understanding is that the capacity test uses the sum of base schedules rather than the base transfer, or rather than only the base transfer schedules. But here in the slides, you'll have base transfer schedules. So I just wanted to confirm my understanding.
Correct. It would be the sum.
Sum of the, okay. So that's just a typo.
Base schedules in the direction, or the BAA.
Does that help?
Yeah, so it should say sum of base schedules rather than base transfer schedules. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question.
We're moving to the next question in the queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. You may ask your question.
Hi, Lindsay Schlickley from NV Energy. I was wondering why their CMRI would not report on all results.
So currently we have our IT specifications were geared for just the hour. So it would be one value per hour, or instead of the 4. If we had gone for the granularity of the 15-minute, it would have delayed the implementation, as we would have had to change our tech specifications, and that would need time for the market participants, the EIM participants, to basically adapt and to modify their IT infrastructure. Our goal is to provide the most transparency, but to get this implemented as quick as possible, and this allowed us to expedite its implementation. I think in the future we'll see, as we get into further implementations, that this granularity will be achieved, but we just wanted to make sure we gave you this functionality sooner than later.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, I think this may be beneficial in the future, especially if there happens to be multiple failures, so that you can investigate each one.
I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
There are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, all right. Then moving forward, now we've got some system changes. So OASIS, that has some changes that we'll be seeing here. So in the OASIS report, which is there's the EIM transfer limit report, will be repurposed to provide the import and export net EIM transfer limits for binding 15-minute and 5-minute real-time market intervals that are impacted by flex ramp up and flex ramp down sufficiency test failure. And that will be done by each EIM balancing authority area. That will be listed there. And the if you look in the business, if you need to have information about the API, that is listed in the business requirement specifications. So there's a pre-existing report data reflecting the high and the low limit types. That's going to remain, but this implementation will also provide the import and export limit types for this report's repurposed use. So here you see a screenshot of OASIS. And there you see the net EIM transfer limits page. You see the time, you see the dates, and then you see the limit type, if it's export or import. And then you're going to see the different intervals along there for each of the hour ending.
If I may, this is Mike. Just wanted to, I don't know if there's any folks considering for the IT implications of repurposing this report, but what we did was we had from 2015, the prior use of the report, there was some data there. We're likely to purge because it's inconsistent with what the new use would be. The other thing is, though, from an IT perspective, if you wanted to start, getting this pulled in, it's existing structure, so nothing's going to change. The API call, the report name won't change. You'll see the label change to include this, make sure it's clarified that this is the net transfer limit. And pretty much you could get, pulling this information, you can get started right now using this existing, with the understanding also that your limit type, which was prior, previously over, under, it'll now be just import export. So that would give you the net direction, and that's just the only change is the value type, values that would be populated in the limit type.
Okay. And just to follow up on what you're going to be seeing in that, for finding 15-minute, 5-minute market intervals, failing their flexible ramping sufficiency test, or if the EIM or ISO BAA is in a contingency, this energy EIM transfer limits report will be repurposed to display the following BAA transfer limit results. It will only display records for interval where BAAs have freezes on their EIM transfer limit, specifically when an FRST fails or the EIM BAA contingency event occurs. EIM limits will be reported for both import and export directions on the following market conditions. If there's the flexible ramping sufficiency test failure for an interval, either RTPD or RTD, only reports the direction of the FRST failure. EIM BAA contingency event occurs, that will be RTD only, occurs for both import and export direction. EIM operator manually locks EIM transfer level via BAAOP, and for RTPD and RTD occurs for both import and export directions. And going forward, for the local market power mitigation enhancements, for a future scenario, there'll be an EIM BAA export transfers are limited for mitigated intervals, but those occur only for export direction. So there'll be something that will be another change when we get into that initiative as well. So any questions about OASIS?
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, pressing pound 2 on your telephone keypad will enter you into the question queue. And we have no questions in the queue.
Okay, so that's kind of a summary of what you're going to be expecting to see in the changes for this initiative. So what's happening next? Our external testing begins on March 27th, and this presentation will be posted again on our Learning Center. The slides will be posted today, and the presentation, the recorded videos or webinar today will be posted on our Learning Center in approximately 3 business days. We are going to be creating a computer-based training based on our testing with more detailed information and more examples that will be posted on our Learning Center in mid-April. And production activation starts is on April 16, 2019. There is an unstructured market sim that is from April 1st through the 7th. And so that's when you can get in there and start playing with this. And again, these notes here that we covered today are in the business requirement specification, which are under our page, under our initiatives page, the release users, the releases page. So do we have any questions before we wrap up today's call?
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. In addition, to submit a written question, please use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. And it looks like we have no additional questions in the queue or in the chat.
Okay, well, thank you very much for everyone for participating today, for your questions. And we have taken those down. We'll follow up on the notes that you have. We'll make sure that those are clarified in the CBT that we have out, and as well as if there are any changes that need to be made to any of the documentation. But again, thank you very much for your questions. Thanks to all my subject matter experts. Thank you, Mike, for participating, Virginia, for sharing that information. If you have not received the notes about the UI changes that are happening today, again, just a reminder to let Virginia Thompson know so she can get that out to you. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great day.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.